with the downward pressure that's been happening for one bedroom unfurnished apartments, they're now getting close to what the prices were for a basement suite. And that's where we're finding a little bit of friction happening, in that basement suites are going to have to go less than the one bedroom apartments. And most owners are not wanting to go that far down. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Today, we're going to be covering the stats for this past month of April, as well as covering a couple of awkward conversations when working with a property manager for the landlords and that. It may be a little odd, but it is the truth. So without further ado, let's get into it. Heads up that the Bank of Canada has kept their mortgage rates at the same rate as of the 29th. And that basically means that there's no relief coming for the landlords anytime soon. So as it has been, simply weather the storm. So that is unfortunate news for us. We were hoping to see a bit of a decline and sort of give a little breathing room for those of us who are still in the landlord business, but here we are. So April did actually show an increase of $29 per month for the rent, which is the first increase in 2026 and the first increase that we've seen since October of 2025. The increase that has occurred of the $29 is for a total of $20.90 for an unfurnished one bedroom. This is still a difference of $188 compared to April of last year. So still a significant difference between the 2 years. It is obviously still down, but at least it's showing a little bit of life. As I'd mentioned in some of the previous shows, I think we're getting pretty close to the bottom. So we should probably bounce around, I would suggest, anywhere from $50 or so. So we'll see if this works out. Hopefully my guess is right, but obviously I don't have a crystal ball. The reason why we use a one bedroom unfurnished as our baseline is because obviously there's many variables otherwise, such as furnished and 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms and so on and so forth. So therein lies why we're using the unfurnished one bedroom as our baseline. Now, typically as the months heat up, we find that a lot of people start moving towards waterfronts. We lovingly call it the sunshine tax. So those of you who are renting out your places near Kitts, White Rock, Lonsdale Key, places like this, you may see a little bit more action as the weather heats up. Simply for the fact that people, they see the sun out, they're down at the beach thinking, it'd be pretty nice to live here. Whereas when it's raining and blowing sideways, most people are not thinking about going to the beach, and thus it doesn't really have that much of an effect. So maybe you might get a little bit of action on the uprise if you have stuff that's near the waterfronts or any of the beaches. So hopefully there is something there for the landlords that are still trying to get rented up there. Now, currently the top 3 most expensive areas across Greater Vancouver is West Vancouver, number 1, North Vancouver, number 2, and Vancouver proper is number 3. The least expensive place to find your rents is in Surrey right now, namely around Surrey Central, top of King George there. It is very difficult right now. There's a lot for sale there. There's a lot for rent there. So that is the competition that's going on out there. So any landlords that are working in these areas, trying to get their place rented, make sure that you're bringing your A game. Maybe take the time to paint it if you need to. Anything that has been ongoing, just fix it up and bring your best foot forward, because there is a lot of competition out there right now. This also leads to a bit of a challenging thing that's been going on right now, and that is that the basement suites are very difficult to rent right now. And one of the main driving forces of this is because normally the basement suite is the bottom rung of the rentals under one bedroom unfurnished apartments. So with the downward pressure that's been happening for one bedroom unfurnished apartments, they're now getting close to what the prices were for a basement suite. And that's where we're finding a little bit of friction happening, in that basement suites are going to have to go less than the one bedroom apartments. And most owners are not wanting to go that far down. Unfortunately, that is what the market is right now. So if a tenant has an opportunity to rent a one bedroom basement suite for $1,700 or $1,600, or they can rent a one bedroom apartment for about the same price or $100 more, they likely will opt for that one bedroom apartment. So right now, basement suites are very difficult to rent. If you're trying to get one rented, try not to fret, and you may actually have to bite the bullet and take less than you were planning on, which is unfortunate, but we cannot control the market. We can only work within it, and that's sort of where we're at. Now, landlords have had to endure getting through these tougher markets. It's been months of decline. As I mentioned at the top of the show, this is the first increase that we've had, a modest increase of only $29 since October of last year. So it's steadily been going down. So this is making things a little bit more difficult for a lot of landlords, and a lot of them have started to lean towards hiring a professional, a licensed property manager, which, by the way, you should make sure that your property managers are licensed. There are a few people that are skirting the laws, we'll say, and that can work out for the most part until something goes wrong. And then all of a sudden they seem to disappear and are next to impossible to find. So do make sure that you check if your property manager is licensed, because they are bound by all the laws and rules and such of the board, and actually have a horse invested in that race. So just as a side note for that there. Now, that being said, of course, we need to talk about a couple of the awkward conversations that can occur when you're working with a property manager. And through conversations with multiple colleagues, one of the main issues that comes up is micromanagement. And this is an awkward conversation, and I'm sure that if it's getting your gut right now, you may be prone to micromanaging people. And that is unfortunate, but here we go anyways. So generally speaking, when somebody is micromanaging, they either don't trust you or they don't trust your skill set. And either way, this is not a good way to build a relationship. So generally speaking, if somebody is hiring a property manager, what they've been doing hasn't been working, especially if it's a placement only, which means that the systems that have been in place that had been working previously are no longer working. This is why you kind of need to lean back a bit. It's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, but allow your property management people to do their job. Let them cook, as it were. A simple example is when you go to a restaurant and you order a steak, yes, you order medium rare and then expect it to come out that way. Just like when you hire a property manager, you are ordering it to be rented and you expect it to come out that way. That being said, in said restaurant, you're not going to be walking in to talk to the cooks and tell them how to do it and when to flip it and what seasoning and all this other stuff. You're just going to let them cook. So same thing works with the property management. You need to let that property management use their systems that they have in place that they've been doing full time to get the job done. And you have to take into account that property manager doesn't get paid unless you get a tenant. So they are absolutely working their butt off to make sure that you get a tenant. So it doesn't mean that you can't ask questions, but I'm just saying that you may want to just give them a little space, let them work. They should be updating you at least weekly about what's happening with your unit, what the feedback is, how many showings, if there's any showings, these sorts of things. Absolutely fine. But trying to get hyper involved in that, it just ends up putting a strain on everybody, such as your property manager and you and your soon-to-be tenant, your property management and tenant. So overall, do try to lean off on the micromanaging if possible. An example is that we just had a micromanaging owner that we actually had to fire. And we would have thought that the beginning of it, when they had cameras specifically set up for all the showings, was an initial red flag. We had thought that that was going to pass on, but it did not. And this owner kept on trying to get involved in everything, including trying to call our trades directly, which is fundamentally our job to get the things done. And what this led to was things took longer to get done. Things got more expensive simply for the fact that the trades had the parts that the owners needed, but the owners had mistakenly thought there was more than one faucet in this case in the bathroom, and there was only one. So the owners, from their micromanaging, demanded 2 faucets get replaced. They essentially doubled the amount of work that needed to be done, even though only 1 faucet was needed to be done. And had they let the professionals that had been hired to get the job done do their job, they would have saved amount of money, because the faucet would have been working, would have been the right one, would have been only installed once instead of twice, and overall would have saved the owner money. So again, this is where micromanagement can become quite a problem, and eventually may lead to just ending the relationship of landlord and property manager, which is unfortunate, but that is the way it goes. And in a nutshell, try to avoid micromanaging. The other reason that you want to look at avoiding micromanaging as well is because if the systems you've been using up to this point haven't been working, trying to instruct someone else to do your exact same system is just going to make it difficult and still won't work. So do try to avoid that. Make sure that communication is big with your property manager and back and forth, and set those agreements ahead of time so that you can avoid problems in the future. Another thing that is coming up when it's very difficult in tough times like this is that cheapest isn't best. So if we're going to use the examples again of pubs and restaurants and that, have you ever gone to your favorite pub and all of a sudden the food is not as good as it was? The glasses aren't as clean. Maybe the well liquor isn't as tasty as it was. This is usually a sign of a pub or restaurant starting to cut some corners to save some money to keep things afloat. Now, I understand that, but that's usually the death roll of said pub. Things start going down, less people start going. It's just not a good product, and people don't want to be there anymore. This same sort of concept applies as a landlord. So it may be tempting right now to hire somebody just off Facebook Marketplace or something. They're cheaper, and you figure that you're saving a couple bucks here and there. However, on the flip side of that, a lot of the people on Facebook Marketplace may not show up. And if they do, they may not be sober in some cases, which we have seen. They may not be insured. And if anything goes wrong, you may not be able to find them again. So this is why you want to try to resist that temptation to hire the dirt cheapest people, and maybe stick with the trades that you know and the ones that you've worked with before, even if they're not the dirt cheapest, because this way you know the job's going to get done and you know it's going to get done correctly. This is especially important if your tenancy is still active, because if somebody doesn't come to fix whatever the issue is, now not only is the problem not fixed, but you also have a tenant that's pissed off that it's not fixed. So do stick with the trades and the people that you do know to make sure that the job gets done correctly, and so that there is somebody to take care of it should it not be, such as calling the bosses of said that, or calling the company itself, along with the fact that they are insured, especially in cases to do with water. So don't find a random plumber off the internet to come fix things, even though they're cheaper than a ticketed one, because should anything go wrong with that, it's going to be very expensive, and that person that you just found on Facebook Marketplace may fade to black and you'll never see them again. So these are a couple tips to handle working within this little bit challenging rental environment. We've covered basically everything to cover for the April stats. If you've been listening this long, thank you very much for listening. My name is Hayes. This has been Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast. Save the caps.